My name is Sam Mills with the World Bank, and thanks so much for coming. I know it's after lunch, and it's understandable if you fall asleep. I'll not be checking who is snoring, so that should be fine. Anyway, we have a packed and exciting 1.5 hour session, and we'll showcase experiences from Mauritius, from Slovenia, and then Korea. And we'll also draw on some global experience as well. I'll moderate this session, and we have 4 distinguished speakers. As you can see, we try to maintain gender balance, but unfortunately, it looks like we are segregated, but that's okay. So I'll begin with a brief overview to set the stage for the presentations, and then perhaps before each speaker speaks, I will then introduce them. Just some brief introductions, not a long, flowery introduction. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes, so hopefully we should have about half an hour to be able to take questions and also for you to share your rich experience. As we all know, SDG 16.9 provides the opportunity to actually link civil registration and civil identification systems. Sometimes we end up with 2 polarizing groups, so to say. One camp saying that, well, CRVS is very important, it's a foundation for legal identity, which is correct, and others too will say that, well, you know what, there are several countries that don't have very good civil registration systems. Why don't we just go ahead and develop the legal identity? That is what India has done in this case. But I think at the end of the day, the goal is to integrate civil registration and identification systems. We understand that not every country will be able to achieve a perfect integration of these 2 systems. But I think there are some basic principles that we need to follow to ensure that at least there is some semblance of integration of the 2 systems. For birth registration, during birth registration, biographical records are taken. The name, the date, place of birth, the names of the parents, what have you. And this is the starting point for establishing identity. But then you may have situations where you have 2 people from the same town or village. They were born on the same day. They would have the same, they will have the same name, place of birth, what have you. But then it becomes very difficult to distinguish whether it is person A or person B. You may also have the case where, for example, somebody will have a birth certificate, shows it to you, but then you can't accurately say whether this certificate belongs to this particular person. And that is why we need other attributes as well. For example, you need a photo of the person, you need a unique identification number, you may need biometrics, let's say fingerprints, iris scans, what have you. So these are all very important attributes. But I think the most important of all these is the unique identification number, because that allows us to be able to link one system with the other. In some countries, for example, you will see that in the birth registration system, during the birth registration, a birth registration number is assigned, and this is captured in the civil registration system. And then in that same country, when this person is older, depending on the laws of the country, when that person goes for an ID card, you have another unique identification number that's assigned to that person. But then this is also captured in the civil identification system. The question is, why do we need 2 different numbers for the same person? Is there a way to find or bridging this gap? And I think, fortunately, our first speaker is going to address this question. He is the head of Global ID Agency with the WCC Consulting based in the Netherlands. So, Sanjay, the floor is yours. Thank you. You have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Samuel, for that introduction. I'd just like to quickly thank IDRC for this invitation to speak here. Thank you very much. But as this presentation is basically comes out of a study done for the World Bank, and I think many of the people are here, so I'd like to also say that it was not me alone, but it was a lot of thinking and a lot of collective thinking that went into it. At the same time, I'm not absolving my responsibility of what I'll present here, but it's really to thank them for having me as part of this study. Oh God, sorry. I did it the wrong way. It's okay. Yeah, got it now. Yes. So I think many of the things, that's one of the advantages of being a speaker later on in a conference. Many of the things are already explained. So the reality is that often ID systems, we work in silos. And as we can see that despite a lot of investment and a lot of effort, these systems in silos do not help you prevent leakages, do not address eligibility, do not link the legal and physical identities, do not effectively address inclusion, duplication, and do not provide kind of maximize the benefits. As we see that there is the civil registration system, there's the civil identification system, often called the national identity system in a country. And then there are the host of functional systems, which could be the pensions, the electoral rolls, etc. Oh, God. Oh, yeah, sorry. No, don't get scared with this diagram. I think every presentation should have one complicated diagram. So this is my complicated diagram. So basically what it shows is that if these systems are interconnected or able to refer to each other, then a lot more benefit can be drawn from each of them. And primarily it is that we often talk of the functional systems like pensions. Now, pensions might need that the person, his identity is authenticated, so you should be able to check his biometrics. Whether he should be given pension, you want to know if he is a national of the country, so it must refer to the civil registration system. So it's essentially, when we put this together, you start seeing the advantages of what ID systems should be able to contribute. So here, that important aspect is that the civil registration system is where the identity of a person gets created, the legal identity rests, and then you have the civil identification system where you have the physical attributes of the person. So these must be very closely associated with one another so that we maximize benefits. And one little, the way, if we organize it this way, I think what Jonathan explained in the session in the morning, identity requires these two blocks of information, the biographics and the biometrics. And here we start looking at appropriate places where these can reside. So civil registration system is the logical or the natural place where the biographics can reside, and the civil identification system is where the biometrics can reside. Now, I'm actually jumping quite a few steps here, but all of you are experts. So as we say, to cut the long story short, if we were to link the civil registration to the civil identification, there are essentially 4 ways in which this can be done. And one of the ways, and the most, again, as I use the word, the natural way, is if a unique ID number could be generated at the time of birth registration, then it is done with. Often one of the kind of implications or one of the things which happens is birth registration happens at birth. So when you have an infant, often the biometrics are not easy to capture at this stage. A lot of countries today, they still do their national ID systems when a person reaches 16 years, at which time then they try and assign a national, a unique ID number. Now, obviously, that's much, much later. So The other option of assigning that number in the civil identification and then posting it back to civil registration is possible, but it will have its own limitations. ID or ICT systems around ID are fantastic. You can also have two different numbers. You can maintain ways of keeping them together. You can keep them encrypted, etc. But then that is creating yet another repository or database of information. And finally, often you do hear discussions, well, if you have biometrics in both the systems, then your linkage is very well established. But is that always possible? That's something which we'll have to see. So this is how I kind of tabulated it very quickly. I'll not read out everything, but this really gives the advantages and challenges of these four different ways of doing it. So if you were to generate the unique ID number in the CRVS, then that becomes the birth registration number, and then in the civil identification system, you could do it years later, or you want to do it at the same time, then the same number is already there and that can be carried forward. What happens is you have some minor irritants, like the civil identification system might also contain the list of the naturalized citizens. It might contain, residents who are, the temporary residents. So you will have to find some via media to generate numbers for them. So I'll not read out the rest, but I think you get the drift of what I'm presenting here. Now, well, this was meant to be not readable, so don't worry. But what it really shows is, and I just heard from Samuel that this report is now public and it can be accessed. We looked at some 70-odd countries, how they assign the national ID or the unique numbers. And what you really see here is, I think most of you are already familiar. Many countries would give numbers starting with the date of birth of the person. So it will start with the YY, MM, and DD, as we say. Other countries might have the region, saying that you're born in such and such region. The region would have a code, and that would be the starting point. And yet, there are other options, like they now do in Aadhaar, where they give a totally random number to an individual. So again, similarly, I have a simple table which gives some of the advantages and disadvantages of having these various categories. I think the report does a good analysis of what are the pluses and minuses of all these options. And surely you could have a look and also, share with us, much more information or things that you might have observed in different parts of the world. So, for example, date of birth, and I think this was already mentioned in one of the other sessions. If you have a ID number which starts with the date of birth, now you are going into Africa where often people are coming for registration without knowing their dates of birth. So what happens is we have worked on systems where you have 10,000 people having the date of birth as 1/1/1968. So how many serial numbers do you attach to it? And there, the system almost breaks down with these kind of problems. Similarly, location, the populations are so much more mobile. Location is no longer a very strong indicator to have in an ID. Serial numbers, you have checksums. And then I think when you go into the details of how some of these ID numbers are constructed, you have some fun which the ICT people have had. That means to indicate the gender, they would add another character to the month or the year, and they would use all kinds of ways of doing it. Then recently the problem came up that you have people living for more than 100 years. So you have just YY, and then, there could be whether he's born in 2015 or 1915. And then you have to have somewhere else to hide a digit which takes care of this. So all these kind of, ways have been found. And then these, the limitations of these methods have also got kind of exposed. So what happens is that, all these systems have pluses and minuses. And one kind of another issue comes up is that we also look at the privacy. And when you have an ID number which contains so much about a person, his age, the gender, then, virtually the number is kind of disclosing so much about the person. And to be frank, here we are a small group. It becomes so much easier to profile. You don't even have to look at the total data. You just look at the ID numbers and you have the profile of your population. So a lot of these issues can be kind of overcome if you, for example, use the random number, which does not disclose any of these things easily. Also, random numbers can be much shorter, as I think Robert pointed out. I think in 11 digits, even India and China, all their population can be coded. You don't need more than 11 digits. While usually the moment you have this YYMMDD business, the numbers you need at least 14 characters, 14 digits, 18 digits. One very interesting study we found out, and this came out of the grassroots, when we asked workers, what do you think of these systems? And one of them came up with this very innovative way. He says, well, if I have this YYMMDD business, a child is born, then I have to go to a computer system where somebody has to look at all the today's births and then assign a number, etc. But if you had, for example, a random number, he said what you need is a roll of such random numbers printed and delivered to a birth registration center. As the births happen, the birth certificates are generated. You tear off this and put it, and that becomes this unique ID number, and that can be assigned. If any of you want to try it in your country, we would be very happy to see if this works out. But it looks very promising. So, and the other thing is when we look back, when we go back, that why are we doing all this? It is the wording, as I try and deal a lot with the industry, and they say that, look, we have got biometrics, why do you need all this? And then it's always that we go back to the wording of SDG 16.9, that it's legal identity with birth registration. So that is the key thing which has to be recorded. So it's the biographics in the legal identity. The complications of how a legal identity might be established. It might be the place of birth, the parents, whatever. So many factors would come into play. And most of that information resides in the biographics in the legal identity. So this itself, and if the UIN is issued at that point where all this data is put onto the system, I think it becomes very natural, almost like a natural count of, of the people being born in your country. So I have good news. I'm almost coming to an end. So that's the conclusion. So, whichever way we look at it, the CRS and CIS need to be strongly coupled, and the unique ID number can play a vital role in it. I think some of the speakers here are going to tell you how countries do this and what are the benefits that they see. But at the same time, I would like to warn you that the system legacies, that is one of the unfortunate things with civil registration systems. They have a past and a present and a future. So you can't just say that I'll change the future, but you have a past which is, done in a totally different way. So you have to look at all that in its totality and then decide what is possible and how to do it. And as I said, SDG 16.9 requires this to be addressed urgently. So that's, that's why I think this is something which needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay, for the excellent presentation. Next, we'll hear a practical example from Mauritius on the use of ID for universal death registration and then the medical certification of cause of death. Actually, Mauritius is the only country in Africa that has been producing medical certification of cause of death to the WHO since 1957. Is that right? Yeah. And then even with the UN agencies, together with the World Bank, periodically generate these maternal mortality estimates. And it is only Mauritius that they don't use the statistical models. They just use the data that comes from the civil registration system. Thanks to our friend. So he's the chief statistician with the Ministry of Health. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sam. So first of all, I wish to thank the World Bank to have given the Mauritius, not me, Mauritius, to show our achievement in regard to CRVS. So as I Sam just said, this is a document that has been circulated in this conference, have been prepared in this conference, and from there you can see in the whole Africa is completely white. The big African continent is completely white, except for Seychelles, Mauritius, and Cape Verde is not there, but it is here, and we have South Africa and Egypt. But as regard to high-level cause of death statistics, only Mauritius is doing that in Africa. So first thing, and then Mauritius, it's a small island of 200 kilometers square, population of 1.3, but still we have live births, 12,000 live births, and around 10,000 deaths in Mauritius. Yeah. So coming to I think there is some overlapping between the first presentation and my presentation. I think this one was theoretical, mine is practical, what we are doing already. So this will allow me to go quicker on the slide. So in fact, in Mauritius, we have a unique identifying number since birth itself, right? When registering, and in Mauritius, live registration is compulsory according to law within 45 days. So in most, it's nearly 99.9%. We have a very few exceptions. So, and coming to, in Mauritius, as I said, we have 100% birth registration, death registration. And regarding death registration, so as you will see, all deaths in Mauritius are medically certified, except for very few cases where people disappeared at sea or something like that. And we don't have, in the past we had verbal autopsy, but now we have no verbal autopsy. It's 100% medically certified deaths in Mauritius, right? And concerning the death certificate, cause of death, so it contains a national identity card and other information. And we are using the recommendation of WHO to do our coding according to the underlying cause of death. Just for your information, those who are not acquainted with ICD, International Classification of Diseases, it's good to know that if, say, for example, a cancer patient died in a road traffic accident, the underlying cause would be a road traffic accident. Whereas if somebody, even a pregnant woman who died in an accident, the underlying cause will still be road traffic accident. So this is good, what is a thing that have started the event to cause the death finally. This is the cause, the underlying cause. So, but as you realize to be able to.
Sorry, please hold on. There's a voice coming from, I don't know whether somebody hiding under the chair.
Mobile,
if you can help us.
It's nobody? No problem, I think.
Can we get some help?
I think we can ignore that, don't worry.
Okay,
we just ignore it.
Speak louder.
Okay. We can you hear me, please? Everyone, can you hear me? Okay. So you can realize that, as we said in statistics, garbage in, garbage out. If the doctors do not give the proper information on the death certificate, we cannot produce good quality cause of death. So statistics. So this is why, based on I visited Australia in 2001, and based on the model being used in Australia, I prepared a document that was circulated in all doctors in Mauritius, and I am planning to do that next year because we have many new doctors coming in. So this document is very important if we want to achieve high quality cause of death certificate. Doctors should first insert the right information on the death certificate. Okay. And coming to the validation, registration, and certification as here, since 2008, whenever a person died, it is mandatory for the declarant to bring the national identity card of himself, herself, or the deceased person. So this is a kind of safeguard against fraudulent practices. Very rarely we can have errors of in the personification error, but very rare because you're using the identification number. Regarding when we are registering a death in the civil status office, which is compulsory before cremation or burial, so automatically the civil status officer will see the information that was recorded for the birth, and this will allow him to check the information being provided by the declarant, and then this will be a kind of validation whether this is exactly the same person that was born and now he's been declared dead, right? So this is very important. And so Mauritius, normally, as some had said earlier, we have been providing, we have mortality statistics in 1920, but we are submitting to WHO because WHO was himself in 1945, I suppose. WHO came into existence, so we started to give WHO information from 1957. And the good thing is that we have a very well-established coordination between the Civil Status Office, Statistic Mauritius, which is normally called in Mauritius the CSO, Central Statistic Office, and Ministry of Health. And this kind of electronic chain, it's improved quite completely the flow of information. I will tell you, but it's not published in EMEA, but in Mauritius, we very often, just listen to me please, Mauritius is very often the first country in the world to submit complete mortality statistics to WHO. Because it's small, not only because it's a small country, but because it is computerized. We have well-trained health statisticians that do the coding. So by now, just before coming here, the data of December was already coded. December 2017. And if you have to clear the data and validate it, we can submit the data to WHO by April 2018. And this is a world record. But it is not homologué, vous savez. Le record n'est pas homologué, malheureusement. So in any case, it is a big achievement for Mauritius because of the computerization of the Civil Status Office. So just to tell you in this slide that we have a Data Protection Act that make provision to protect information when the flow of the information is going. So we have several laws that protect the disclosure of confidential information regarding all individual in Mauritius. And this linkage, of course, is greatly reducing duplication, improve timeliness, as I just mentioned, reduce costs, and increase efficiency at all levels. I just wanted to show you what I just, the very practical thing that, this is my, because I am just talking, but I want to show you practical thing, how it's run. So this is my identity card. Okay, the number is here. And this is my passport. The identification, same one is here. It's my passport. This is my payslip. I won't tell you my salary, but just to tell you that even here, the national identity card is here. And I am glad and also not happy to give you the death certificate of my mother. The national identity card is here. And this is a birth certificate of my son. So at the birth, the NIC is already here. So this is a practical thing, how things works in Mauritius. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing the remarkable achievement in your country. The next presentation will be from Slovenia. As we all know, for the past 100 years or so, the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, what have you, they have been able to establish a civil registration system, and they have a unique identification number for linking civil registration and identification. But unfortunately, countries like Slovenia, in the last couple of decades, actually, they've been able to make great strides. And I understand they don't actually carry out the 10-year conventional population census anymore. They use the registration system to do the census. In addition to that, they've been able to use this system to be able to achieve universal health coverage. So that is what the next presentation is going to be on. And thanks for Martina for joining us to make this presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad and honored that the Slovene system was recognized as an example of good practice and that I was invited to introduce it to you. Since I work for the Health Insurance Institute of Slovenia, this presentation will focus on health insurance provider point of view. Slovenia is a small country with only 2 million inhabitants, and we all have 3 unique identification numbers. The main one is the unique citizen number, which is assigned at birth. But due to legal restrictions, it cannot be used for identification in all spheres of life. So that is why we all also get a health insurance number, which is used in all areas of healthcare and health insurance. And we also get a tax number, which is used in the financial area. And how does one get a unique citizen number at birth? There are 14 maternity hospitals in Slovenia, and 99% of all births happen at those hospitals. All maternity hospitals are connected to the special application called the e-births, which was developed by the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Interior, and Ministry for Public Administration. And how does it work? Upon admission to the maternity hospital, the mother and the father, if present, identify themselves with the health insurance card, and their identification data is entered into the e-birth application. After the baby is born, its data is also entered into the e-birth application and sent to the Central Register of Population, where the unique citizen number for the baby is instantly created and sent back to the hospital. The introduction of electronic birth registration provides a series of benefits, such as the hospital immediately receives the official identification number of the baby, and it can equip his medical records with it. Data for birth registration is sent in electronic form, which means that the manual work, the manual labor is reduced, the possibilities of mistakes are reduced, and the entire process is shortened. The updating of data in other public registries who collect data from the Central Population Register is quick and improved. Parents can exercise their rights at centers for social work faster and simpler. Time needed to obtain the newborn's birth certificate is shortened. What is also important, the quality and completeness of data capture for health statistics and analytics is improved. And issuing of the health insurance card for the baby is much faster than before. And this also enables a more accurate recording of health services provided to the baby. After the data on a new person is entered in the Central Population Register, it is also available to the Health Insurance database. The Health Insurance Institute of Slovenia and the Central Population Register exchange data on daily basis. That means all new entries and all changes to existing data are exchanged on daily basis. When data on a new person is entered into the health insurance database, we dedicate a health insurance number to this person, and this is the basis for issuing a health insurance card. The health insurance card is a document which is used for identification when using your health insurance rights. Let me also state that the Health Insurance Institute of Slovenia is the only provider of compulsory health insurance. And our task is to provide insured persons with the rights to health services, and we do that by collecting insurance payments, premiums, and by paying healthcare providers for the services provided. By law, everyone with a permanent residence in Slovenia must be included in the health insurance scheme. We are obliged to systematically invite everyone who does not have a valid health insurance for more than 20 days to get included in the health insurance scheme. These are persons who are registered as permanent residents in the Central Population Register and consequently also in our health insurance database, but they do not have a valid insurance, which means that contributions for them were not paid. In most cases, these are people who have changed their status. For example, a student starting to work, but the employer has not yet registered him with the Health Insurance Institute. At the end of last year, there were only 400 people who did not respond to our calls and had invalid health insurance. And these are people that most likely do not live in Slovenia anymore. We have also a solution in place that everyone can check the validity of his insurance using his health insurance number, either on the web portal or with his mobile phone. So I can say that the entire population of Slovenia is covered and included in the health insurance scheme. Health insurance card of the patient must be presented every time when using healthcare services. Healthcare providers then charge us, the Health Insurance Institute, for each service per each person through the electronic billing system. In this way, we collect an enormous amount of billing data on each person. We have built a large data warehouse that we use for decision making, for tracking business results, predicting future trends, finding errors and fraud, discovering and promoting good practices, and so on. Of course, since we are dealing with the sensitive personal data, let me emphasize that the security of data is guaranteed in accordance with the Slovene law, and the Slovene law on data protection is one of the most rigorous in European Union. All the accesses to data are recorded. Access is strictly limited on need-to-know basis, and data in the data warehouses are depersonalized. Well, I hope that I have intrigued you not only with the beautiful scenery in the background, but also with our solutions. I will gladly answer any questions later. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Martina, for the excellent presentation. Next will be the presentation on Korea. As we all know, Korea is a remarkable success story. They have the resident registration system, which has linked civil registration and ID system. And then they also have the e-government that has won several awards from the UN. But this presentation will focus on its application in the use of universal health coverage. So I want to introduce Professor Minah Kang from the Ewha Women's University, not women, Women's University, to make the presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So many people actually ask whether there's a spelling mistake. No, it really is Women's University, meaning that each woman has individual, unique importance. So we value one woman. So that's why we spelled it as a woman's, not women's, or woman apostrophe S. Okay. Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to introduce our system, Korean Civil Registration and Vital Statistics, especially in terms of how it is used or helpful to achieve the goal of universal health coverage. We have 4 team members, and Professor Krim Bey is also there with us today. Before I talk about the cases where UID, how UID is used for UHC in Korea, I'd like to introduce a framework that we used when we analyzed these cases. About 2 years ago, we wrote a paper based on the work of Hood and Marget, where they introduced a policy tool in 2 aspects. One aspect is as a detector, and the other aspect is the effector. I mean, in our paper, we introduced the CRVS has at least two important functions. One as a detector, meaning that CRVS can be an instrument that government can use for taking in information, i.e., so that means that CRVS can be used to take information from individual and use it to control and manage those people. At the same time, CRVS can be an effector, meaning that it can be used as a tool that government can use to try to make an impact on the world outside, meaning that the CRVS can also be used as an important tool to give benefit to its people. Well, UHC is such a useful example to understand, to see the CRVS as functioning as both of these roles as detector as well as effector. As we all know, UHC is described as a cubic model. It's not working. Down? Not on the screen. Okay. So yeah, I will just use your imagination. So the UHC usually is described as a cubic model with 3 dimensions. One is population coverage, the other is benefit coverage, and as well as cost coverage. So using CRVS, as you can guess, the population, we can guess how much what proportion of population is covered by this system. And if it is also the CRVS system is connected with the health insurance database, then we can also tell what's the proportion of services or benefits that are covered by the system, as well as how much cost is covered by this health insurance or healthcare system. And at the same time, when we know who is covered by the system, then we can also tell how much inequality it exists within the healthcare system. This is a picture of a snapshot of a brief history of the Korean CRVS system, and you can see how the system has changed its role from a detector to an effector. Since the Korea has established the resident registration system, which is a CR system in Korea, in 1968. It first started as an administrative management instrument. At the time, there was not communication with the citizens, but then it was mostly used for manage and control population mobilization, and it worked as a simple instrument for administrative management. And at the time, there was insufficient attention to civil services. In comparison, from 1990s, the Korea has established electronic resident registration system. So we have a database, and from there, the purpose of the CRVS system becomes to secure efficiency in administration. They started a two-way communication, although it was incomplete, and then Korea has established a fast and efficient administrative process, and it was able to provide administrative information, although it was fragmentary. But then at the time, there was a lack of awareness of privacy protection. And recently, from 2000, Korea has built an integrated electronic resident registration system, and then also administrative information sharing system, which I will show you in a minute. With the system, Korea is able to provide integrated administrative service, and then now the two-way communication between the government and citizen is completed, so the citizens, anyone can get those the documents anywhere, anytime, meaning that from home computer 24 hours to 7 days. And then, so by establishing this administrative information sharing system, now we can provide integrated administrative service provision, and we start to pay attention to the protection of personal information. So this is a snapshot of a administrative information sharing system. As you can see, the administrative information sharing system is within the Ministry of the Interior, and it collects all the data from the source organizations, central government, local government, and Supreme Court in regards to family relations register. So information in 148 categories are collected, and then it is also used by these different organizations, 50 agencies of central government, local government, public agencies, banks, and educations, and everywhere. And then you see that UID, unique ID, is the key to link these source organizations with user organizations and different databases. So UID is actually performing a similar function within the Korean National Health Insurance System. As in any other national health insurance system, Korea also has many stakeholders within the National Health Insurance System. Of course, Ministry of Health and Welfare and National Health Insurance Corporation, and the insured who are patients and the public, and healthcare institutions, and HERA, which is a institute that reviews and assesses the claims, medical claims. And within this system, with the UID, patients can have access and afford their health care services, and provider can get reimbursement and get their performance evaluated, as well as control expenditure. And at the same time, government can also make the NHI coverage enhancement policy and make the evidence-based decisions and promote the sustainability and innovation within the system. So from now on, I'd like to introduce how UID is actually helping for the Korean healthcare system to achieve universal health coverage. We divided this into 4 different cases. First, prevention, and treatment and management of diseases, as well as health operation of national health insurance system, and healthcare data utilizations. So if you go back to the prevention, as you can see, UID can work all along the process of enrollment, as well as management, and provide review and feedback. If we look at the vaccination system, you can see that MOI, which is Ministry of Interior, MOHW, and MOE work together in collaboration with NHIS, which is a National Health Insurance Corporation, and medical institutions and local public health centers in terms of enrolling and managing and providing review and feedback for the the vaccination for the children, and which is the whole system is managed by the unique ID, which is our number here in Korean case. Health promotion and MCH project is operating in a similar pattern. And also for the nutrition, there is a program they call this Undernourished Children's Meal Aid Project. With unique ID, we can investigate the personal environment as well as home environment of the children so that they can determine the eligibility and what are the needs of these specific children. And also in terms of the Nutri Plus program, which is for pregnant mothers and postpartum mothers, also with the UID and the background information, we can identify who are the pregnant mothers to receive this support from the government. In terms of the treatment and management of infectious and chronic disease, for the infectious disease patients, the UID can be used to enroll these patients as well as manage their diseases as well as provide review and feedback again. TB is also similar, but in terms of HIV and AIDS patients, you can see that those patients are anonymously tested to protect their the sensitive information at a local public center for free. And then afterwards, the management of these HIV/AIDS patients are done by the control number, a generated control number, rather than their unique ID. And in terms of chronic disease management, the NHIS recently created and developed a pilot project to how to manage the chronic disease patients. So once a patient enroll into the system of NHIS, they can send their blood pressure and blood glucose level to the server at the NHIS, and then those information is delivered to medical providers. Then with those information, these doctors can monitor the patient's situation as well as send back their monitoring opinion to this patient. In terms of operation of national health insurance system, which works similar to we just heard from Martina in Slovenia cases. We also use a universal ID, unique ID for enrollment and management and review, provide review and feedback, and also it works same for the medical care assistance insurance, which is public insurance for the people with income on the poverty level. So basically, with these two national health insurance system, almost 100% of the Korean populations are covered under this system. And as you can see here in the picture, NHID is connected and composed of different database of the whole population, which is about 50 million people in Korea, so that we can use that for managing eligibility and contributions, medical service, health screening services, and long-term care services. And as you can read the small font letters below, that every DB is linked by resident registration number, which is our UID here, a unique, unchangeable identification for all Korean residents since 1968, which is the time that the Korea civil registration system has started. Also, as you can imagine, that UID is also useful for personal data analysis. Well, as you can see here, with the unique ID, a patient can enroll into the Health IN system, which is provided by National Health Insurance Corporation. And on the website, the person can diagnose their lifestyle and prescriptive information for the person themselves. And then also the website provide information to prevent specific diseases such as metabolic syndrome, blood pressure, diabetes, and obesity, and as well as it provides some information about disease prediction. So basically the person can sign in and then automatically retrieve results and then answer questionnaire by item, and then confirm prescription advices by item, and then store and continue with routine health care. So this is basically how this HealthIn works. And if it combines as a group data, it can also is connected with other databases such as weather system and online air quality system database, so that it can predict the medical trend and also can send out warning. And then this is the system for the asthma prediction, and then send out warnings of each region. And also, it can also use for individual to transfer their own medical record. This is a system that just is starting from this year. So last year, the Ministry of Health and Welfare announced that it will standardize all the EMR along the country, within the country, so that people can transfer their medical record from an institution to the other institute. Before, until now, we have to carry on a paper or a CD if we want to transfer our medical record from one hospital to another hospital. But from this year, 2018, and hopefully by next year, they will create a system to allow transfer medical records by electronically. Also, in terms of health insurance big data, well, for this purpose, UIDs are removed to protect private information, and then the use of provision of data is strictly restricted. And the big data is only used for academic and policy research. Well, as you see, Korea has developed a CRVS system from a detector role to effector role, meaning that, well, it started as a tool to control and manage the population, but now it is used more usefully to provide benefits to its citizen. But then, at the same time, as it is so well connected with other databases, there's this continuous concern about the privacy and protection of individual information. And there are several, notorious cases that show the leakage of private information. So we have a Personal Information Protection Act, as well as Act on the Protection of Personal Information maintained by public institutions. That's the name of the act, the long one. So we have those acts, but people still argue that there is not enough protection of personal information, so that we need to have Medical Information Protection Act, which specifies about the specific rules about how to protect healthcare information. But at the same time, with the advent of fourth industrial revolution and rising demand for big data and more information to be used for other purposes, there is this continuous debate on how much regulation we can continue what we need. And so this is the maintaining the balance between how to use this data as well as how to, at the same time, how to protect the personal information is an ongoing issue on our agenda. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Minah, for the insightful presentation on the experience from Korea. I think we have about 30 minutes to take questions and to perhaps to give you the opportunity to also share your rich experience on the integration of civil registration and civil identification, also some of the practical applications. Bonka, your hand was already up. Okay, so I think I'll allow Bonka to go first. And then please feel free, either you can direct the question to specific speakers or just share your experience so that we can also learn from you. Thank you.
I'm Bunchai Kisanayotin from Thailand. I have a question to Professor from Korea. Just recently that I heard the news that there is a big hacking or leakage of the number, and the ID number is similar to our first speaker talking about. It's really easy to decode it, and I think how the government working on that kind of the securities, and do the country change the number from the very easy hacking, like I learned that it's sex, birthday, something like that. That is very easy to profiling those. The second question is also for Professor from Korea, that it seems like they has a big database in related to health. One is from HERA, the reviewing insurance reviewing agency. Another one is the National Health Insurance System. Do they have any linkage, or how the country manage all of these big database and come up with the unified database? Thank you.
John, could you please? Oh, no, sorry. Jonathan first, and then John.
Hi, thank you very much. This was 4 excellent presentations. My question is something that we deal with in a lot of our operations now, which is when a country is introducing a unique ID number and there's existing systems all around, how do you reliably get that unique ID number into those other systems and make sure that you're capturing the right number and linking that person's number with the right individual? How do you seed the number into existing systems? Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentations and experience. My name is Agbesi Amuzo. My question is for all presenters. Just to know, I mean, many countries in low-income countries are trying really to, emulate what you're doing. And so can you talk a little bit about what were the key facilitating factors or opportunities that led to, from not having an ID to an ID? I mean, it seems that you have an ID that is well functioning. What were the key opportunities that made this successful in your country? And what is the perspective of your population in terms of how this is rolling? Thank you.
My name is Sheda Badi from Open Data Watch, and excellent presentation. Thank you all. My question to you is that for setting up civil registration systems, of course, we have international guidelines from the UN. For the integration of the ID and civil registration, I know there is no place to go, but if you were, the world leader and wanted to set up these guidelines, where would you think this set of guidelines should be established? Through what processes?
I'd also like to thank the speakers, conference speakers. We are attempting in Cameroon to go towards a unique identifying number with the support of German cooperation. We're setting up an information plan, but I'd like to know how, biometrics being difficult when the child is born, how can we guarantee that the number itself given to a specific child when born will not be modified fraudulently when the child reaches their adulthood, right?
Congratulations to all the speakers for not only the great presentations, but the great achievements in all of those cases. My question builds on the one about enabling factors, and it's a question about return on investment. So we know that in a lot of countries where an ID is being introduced, they're not always being effectively linked with civil registration. So this question of integration is an important one. And I'm wondering if from any of the cases or from your research, you have evidence of the return on investment that comes from doing that integration, or the costs associated with not having those systems effectively integrated. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, please. It looks like you have lots of questions, which is good.
Thank you. My name is Anir Chaudhary. I'm from Bangladesh, Prime Minister's Office. Great presentation, so congratulations to all of you. I couldn't help but notice that all 3 countries had a universal health coverage, a very good system in place for quite some time. Now, that could probably be seen as the incentive for the ID system's effectiveness. Now, what other incentives could you think about? I mean, countries that don't have that kind of a universal health coverage insurance in place, there must be some drivers for acceptance of IDs and CR systems coming together. So it'd be very interesting to hear from all of you. Thank you.
Thanks for all these questions. Well, I don't know whether we'll be able to respond to all adequately, but I think we'll begin with Sanjay. Perhaps, Sanjay, let's take an example of a country like Ethiopia that has a paper-based system, and they want to transition to using unique identification numbers. If you can explain how that can be done, perhaps that could respond to some of the questions. And then specifically, you can respond to any of the questions that have been posed. Thank you.
Thanks, Samuel, for pushing me into the deep end. Not a very good swimmer, actually. But I think Ethiopia is a very classic example because it's still a very decentralized system, 63,000 kebeles where they issue these kind of numbers. Each place is, the systems have kind of very uniquely evolved. Even the piece of paper which they give, they all look very different. You would think they come from different parts of the world. So this is a typical example, and I think this the simple example we gave of if we had this kind of a system where you could just stick a little unique ID number, I think it somehow fitted very well into what could work in Ethiopia. Thinking of a computerized system, a system which would be available at 2 in the night to register a birth, that is not easy to imagine. So that is where you think that a simple system like this could work. So here I'll just take also the opportunity to answer some of the other questions which I thought I could answer. Jonathan's question, that is unique ID numbers, especially the legacy, and which I kind of alluded in my concluding remarks. I was hoping that nobody will ask the question, but Jonathan did. That is, CRVS systems have a past, have a present, and have a future. Many people come up with solutions which address the future, that from tomorrow I'll do the things like this, but then what do you do of the past data? The past data we find is in two forms. One is that it was computerized at some stage. It is in some legacy system which belongs to a particular generation. You're not sure if that data is readable today or whether it can be read or kind of translated or brought up to date. And the other is those meticulously recorded manual records, which you don't know how you're going to, what you're going to do with them. Are you going to employ a army of people who are going to punch them in? Are you going to send them to India where people are going to, in data centers, punch them in, make mistakes? They don't know the local, the cultural nuances of names and those kind of things. Here again, sorry to keep on coming back to my way of doing. I have often visualized that you have these cards or you have these pieces of, registers or the pages of, all you need to do is stick these numbers on each of the page and just scan those pages. So if you're looking for a particular number, that page comes up, so at least you don't have it in a data form, but you have it in the form of a record available on an automated system. So over the, the transition period when you bring these systems kind of, up to kind of a very computerized, kind of a digitized kind of a system, I think these intermediate stages we would have to think of. And, we can always do a cost-benefit kind of analysis. And that question of the return on investment is very important. And I don't know, today morning for the first time, in fact, in one of the presentations, I heard that having a common, a unique ID number actually saves countries costs. And that is something, so maybe you can think of that as the next study to give me, and I'll be happy to do that. But that's a very interesting point. And lastly, that's something which I can boast of. I'm on many standards committees all over the world. So your question of where should, if there was a process or if there was a standard to be made where it should reside. And I look at it as the simple, either or situation of whether in the CRVS system or in a national ID system. Unfortunately, national ID systems are governed by national laws. There is no kind of universal body which puts together this. But at least I see that in CRVS you have some kind of a you have surgeons UNSD 2014 document. You could always have a chapter there which says that this is how you could assign a number. But I cannot think of any place in the national ID paradigm where you could have it put down and which can be used universally. There are the ISO standards, but those ISO standards are, they are engineers. It's for engineers. It's not for administrators. So I think that's the difference. So I think the CRVS would be the right place to have this, kind of thing. And how to get the numbers correct, I didn't go into the details today, but things like check digits and, those kind of techniques are there to ensure that, you kind of minimize the kind of clerical errors which can be, taken care of while bringing all these systems up to date. I do admit I have given quick answers. If there are, more things, then we could add to it. And
just to add to the last part of concerning whether we have universal standard guidelines. I think this conference could be an opportunity to make some recommendations and direction where we can have, for example, for disease classification, we have international classification of diseases for classification, and we have different. But I think this conference could be an opportunity of thinking about how we can go for having a kind of standard, unique way of putting this together. Yeah, it could be.
Thank you. Martina.
Well, maybe I can add something to the return on investment question. I cannot speak for the entire CRVC system in Slovenia, but only for the health insurance number introduction. I have read a cost-benefit analysis that was prepared around 20 years ago, before I started working for the Health Insurance Institute, and it said that taking account the costs and the benefits of the health insurance number introduction and of the health insurance card introduction, it would be return on investment would be in 4 years. I'm not sure if we ever checked it later. So that's what I can say about that.
I think I can answer the first question. It is true that our ID card has numbers, 13 numbers shown on it with my picture and my fingerprint. And the 13 ID number has quite a lot of information. The first 6 digits is my birth date. And the 7th number is whether I'm female or male, my gender. And the 2 is 2 other regions, place where I born, and the next 2 letter is the place where the card where the card was issued. So it has quite a lot of information on it. So people have a lot of civil organizations has raised this as an issue and we tried several times to make it as a random. Random numbers are very convenient. However, in a way that I can remember my ID number because I know my 6th digit is my birth date. And then if it was 13 random numbers, it would be very difficult for me to use it. So, that's just one joke, but still, I have separate number for my driver license, passport number, as well as health insurance number. But now I always use my my registration number only for every purpose. So if I use my number, then I can do anything So it's so convenient. But on the other side, as you mentioned, there have been several scandalous events that the huge amount of private information has leaked by the government, by the insurance company, or in the local government as well. So it is becoming a serious issue. So there is a really very serious debate about how we can maintain the balance between protect individual information, but then at the same time can use those information for the convenience and effective government management. And in terms of linkage between HERA and NHIS, yes, those data sets are linked together, so we can do any type of analysis only if the de-identification of the individual's number is removed, the de-identification is done. Then we can use that information combined between the database between NHIS and also HERA.
Thank you. To add to the response regarding the guidelines for integrating civil registration and civil identification systems, I think a logical starting point could be the legal framework. The UN has a legal framework dated, I think, 1988. But currently, it was mainly regarding civil registration. But it is currently being revised. Now, I think the good news is that it incorporates both civil registration and civil identification. This morning, there was Sergeant showed a slide regarding civil registration, integration of civil registration and identification systems. That slide came from work that the World Bank has been doing, actually. So we have this e-learning course, which was developed in collaboration with the global CRVS group. And we have actually one of the modules is on integration of civil registration and civil identification. That is our baby steps to bring up the issue of how to integrate the two. The identification for development at the World Bank is also a multi-sectorial group that looks at, although the name sounds like it's focused on ID, it's actually focused on both ID as well as civil registration. Perhaps with the next revision of the UN principles and recommendations, perhaps there could be a session that could actually look at integration of civil registration and identification. I think we have still more questions from the floor, so I think we'll give the chance to you to share your experience with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot to the presenters for the very nice presentation. So I think, a lot of the presentations are looking at this intersection of identification systems and universal health coverage, but there were a couple of slides actually from Korea which were looking at securities or issues related to health security. And so I think, just stepping back, if we look at global health generally, Ebola, Zika have been, pretty monumental epidemics we've seen in the last few years. And I think a lot of political attention is being raised around, how we can address these and prevent these from happening in the future. And I think identification does have a role to play. And so I had actually two questions on this front. The first was looking at how we can use identification for known epidemics. And so I think you had mentioned like HIV, for example, in Korea, there was issues related to sensitivity. And so they didn't use, this known identification number, but generated a different one. But maybe for other diseases, it is, not as sensitive and you are able to use that. And so I think that's just my first question, for these known epidemics, how we can use identification to advance, these surveillance efforts. And then the second one is actually related to a point made this morning by the statistician from Canada, Anil Arora, I think was his name. And so he was talking about a national level from a governance perspective here in Canada. Recently there was an opioid epidemic, and they were able to understand that, this signal or that this threat was happening using national vital statistics data. And so just want to see, like in any of your countries, are your systems generating data in real time or in enough time to give policymakers this information? So, whether it's something with a known threat, such as an opioid epidemic, or even, a new epidemic, such as Ebola, which may not have, a standardized diagnostic process, are you able to use vital statistics data to have a signal that something is wrong and that some government action is needed to, contain an epidemic before it is grown to proportions which are more difficult to control? So, yeah, thanks a lot again for the presentations.
Okay.
I just want to answer one part of the question. How it's work in Mauritius concerning for epidemic cases. But you are right that the unique identifier does not work, especially when the people are not dying. But when we have a lot, unfortunately, Mauritius is a small country, but it's still when we see that we have a problem, we have the birth registration, which is available to the Minister of Health on request on a daily basis. So we can monitor the number of deaths going on due to a specific disease. In any case, if this happens, then we can take appropriate action. But I think that you're right. For the unique identifying number is not helpful in Mauritius, for example, in other cases where we don't have deaths. But we have a very disease surveillance is very strong in Mauritius, but without the use of unique identifier. Yeah. Okay.
You want to respond to that? I think Jonathan also wants to respond to this. So please, you can go after. Yeah.
Okay. Well, recently, about 2 years ago, Korea has an incident of MERS, MERS, which was a huge, scandal in our country. And then at the time, we were using the ID. We were able to identify how this one person is related to each other, and then how they moved. So it was able to follow up these, identify patients and their families and all together, which was very good in a way. But at the same time, there was a huge leakage of those personal data of these people, the family members of these MERS patients. So their address, their telephone number, their names were leaked. And then because of that, those family members were abused verbally among those neighbors because of the information. So again, there's these two sides. Because of this unique ID, it was very convenient and easy, quick. It was quick for us to identify these patients, but at the same time, if the data is not secured, then there's this leakage problem.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sam, for allowing me to speak again. I just wanted to, a few thoughts came onto my mind as this discussion was going. First of all, I think it's important to add that if a national ID number is issued to someone, the service providers, the health sector or tax authorities or driver licenses, whatever, they don't have to use that number themselves, right? Because if you put that in the front end, you expose for a lot more of privacy risk. For example, Professor Kang, you mentioned some just now. But it's on the back end, and where you collect that number to create that link on the back end. That's the genesis of my question earlier. But I just wanted to add a point with regards to the issue of guidelines and standards. Just to do a little bit of a plug of the World Bank's work in this space, we've just published a discussion paper on standards across the identity life cycle, including on ID numbers, where there are some kinds of standards and various other unique numbers. But I do want to also add a word of caution about putting that into the principles and recommendations for a vital statistics system, because those are principles and recommendations for a vital statistics system. And I think the UN is very well placed to deal with this issue. Actually, it's probably the best placed organization to deal with this issue. But it needs to involve a group of stakeholders that is larger than national statistical offices. Because also what we're seeing a trend now is, for example, in Europe, where there is interoperability now of an ID issued by Germany to go to France and open a bank account. ID numbers, yes, Sanjay mentioned that these are subject to national legal frameworks, but increasingly these are becoming supranational, whether it's a regional or maybe global. I mean, you think about, for example, the telephone number. We all have area codes for our countries, and sometimes, the state within that. That's not centrally issued. That's issued by states. So, in the future, who knows, maybe the ID numbers will have some kind of reference that ties that person to a state. So I think we have to think a bit bigger in this sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And that's a very good point. So I think that is why it's very important that those working on civil registration, national ID systems, vital statistics, we need to come together rather than stay in our various camps. And I think the question that Amitabh also asks illustrates this. If you have a very good civil registration system, complete, accurate, what have you, you will not be able to handle the epidemics because you only have information on the births and the deaths. But if you have the ID number, we can use it for the electronic medical records, what have you. At least we'll have a way of identifying someone when the person comes to a health facility or perhaps when we do outreach services. So in that way, we'll be able to record that, and then we can see some of the trends that are occurring in certain parts of the country, what have you. So I think this is a perfect example why we actually need to be able to integrate civil registration and ID systems. It looks like we are running out of time. I know most of you have. If you have other questions, perhaps we can take it during the coffee break. But I want to take this opportunity to thank our speakers for sharing the insights from the various countries, and also to you for the active participation. We really appreciate it. Thank you.